Normandy, France, June 11, 1944. Dawn. The morning fog clung to the hedgerows like a curtain, softening the thunder of distant artillery. Smoke drifted lazily between the shattered apple orchards. And in that pale gray light, German officers of the 352nd Infantry Division raised their field glasses toward an approaching line of American soldiers. What they saw made no sense. The Americans had already taken casualties from machine gun bursts the night before. Some were limping, some were bandaged. Many were covered in dried mud from crawling through ditches. Yet the entire formation kept advancing slow, steady, methodical. A German lieutenant muttered, half in confusion, half in disbelief. They do not stop. The Americans moved with an eerie calmness. When one man fell, another stepped into his place. When German mortars struck the hedgerow, they scattered only for a moment, then reformed, pushing forward again. Their helmets glinted in the early sun like a line of steel rivets marching across the field. The officers had expected hesitation, fear, disorder. Instead, they saw infantry that seemed to function with an almost mechanical resolve. In that moment, a chilling realization crept across the German command post. The Americans were fighting like machines. In the years leading up to the Normandy invasion, few German commanders feared American infantry. The Wehrmacht's early experiences in North Africa and Italy had convinced many officers that American soldiers were inexperienced, overly reliant on equipment, and quick to break under pressure. To them, the U.S. Army seemed like a force still learning how to fight, while the Germans were already masters of ground warfare. But by June 1944, that perception was already out of date. The American military that landed in Normandy was no longer the green force of 1942. It was a hardened, restructured army forged by failures, rebuilt by commanders determined never to repeat them, and strengthened by an industrial giant capable of supplying men and machines without pause. The buildup in Britain had transformed the U.S. Army. Hundreds of thousands of soldiers trained relentlessly across English fields, practicing amphibious assaults, night attacks, and combined arms tactics. Entire training villages were built to replicate French hounds. Specialized units rehearsed hedgerow breaches. Infantry divisions drilled day and night under veteran instructors from Italy and North Africa. The Germans had no idea how extensive this transformation had been. On June 6, 1944, D-Day, the first encounters began to expose the truth. American infantry landing on Omaha, Utah, Gold, Juno, and Sword Beaches showed resilience that German reports did not expect. Despite devastating casualties at Omaha, companies regrouped, reorganized, and pushed forward. At Utah, infantry maneuvered with precision, adjusting instantly after landing a mile off target. But it was only in the days after D-Day, as the fighting moved inland, that German commanders began noticing something far more troubling. The hedgerow country of Normandy, with its tight lanes, earthen walls, and sunken roads, was supposed to be the perfect defensive terrain. It was, in fact, where the Germans expected the Americans to break. Instead, the U.S. infantry divisions, the 1st, 4th, 29th, 90th, 2nd, and 3rd among many others, fought with a consistency and discipline that surprised even their own officers. When pinned down, they flanked. When cut off, they dug in. When ambushed, they regrouped and counterattacked. German machine gun teams complained in their early reports. The Americans continued to advance even under precise fire. Another officer noted, their infantry shows unusual persistence. They fight as if driven by an internal engine. This perception grew stronger every day. German soldiers who expected rapid breakthroughs against the material-heavy American instead encountered infantry who absorbed losses and kept coming. The reality was simple yet deadly. The Americans had learned how to fight and how to endure. As early as June 8, Wehrmacht officers in Normandy began warning headquarters that the American infantry was not behaving like the enemy they had expected. And soon, as the battle for hedgerow country intensified, the shock would turn into open alarm. The deeper the Germans pushed into the Normandy fighting, the clearer a hard truth became. Their entire doctrine for evaluating American infantry had been wrong. What they were facing in June 1944 was not the hesitant, equipment-dependent soldier they remembered from Tunisia or Salerno. Instead, they were fighting a force that combined firepower, discipline, and relentless movement in ways the Wehrmacht had not anticipated. German doctrine had long been built on the belief that superior training, veteran leadership, and concentrated firepower would break any opposing infantry. Against the Soviets, this often worked. Against the British, it created stalemates. But in Normandy, those assumptions collided with an American army that had evolved dramatically. One of the first major shocks was the American emphasis on small unit leadership. German officers noticed that when an American platoon leader was killed, the unit did not collapse. A sergeant or corporal immediately stepped forward and continued the mission. This decentralized leadership, reinforced by rigorous NCO training, confused German battlefield expectations. American infantry were also equipped with weapons that fundamentally changed the pace of battle. The M1 Garand the world's most widely issued semi-automatic rifle at the time, allowed U.S. soldiers to fire 8 accurate shots rapidly, far faster than the German Carentan 8K bolt-action rifle. Germans frequently reported being pinned down by continuous fire from American riflemen, something they were not accustomed to encountering. Add to that the devastating combination of BAR automatic rifles, .30 caliber machine guns, and bazookas, and the Germans quickly learned that the Americans had created an infantry squad that could pour firepower similar to a light machine gun section. German reports began shifting in tone. Their fire is too constant. They attack even after heavy losses. Their squads operate independently and do not hesitate. Then came the hedgerows. The bocage country of Normandy was supposed to be the Germans' advantage, with every field bordered by shoulder-high earthen walls topped with thick vegetation. It created kill zones perfect for MG-42 teams and ambush tactics. The Germans believed these natural fortifications would break any Allied infantry advance. And at first, they did slow the Americans, but only for a few days. Then the U.S. infantry began adapting faster than the Germans could adjust. Engineers mounted steel blades on Sherman tanks, creating the famous Rhino tanks capable of cutting straight through hedgerows. Infantry learned to suppress, flank, and clear hedgerow strongpoints using coordinated FIRAM maneuver tactics. Junior officers and enlisted men innovated on the spot, something German command had not expected from the supposedly rigid American. This learning curve stunned the Wehrmacht. German officers wrote, "The Americans learn quickly. They do not repeat their mistakes. Their infantry fights as one machine, each part replacing the other." The combination of firepower, adaptability, and resilience created an enemy the Germans could slow, but could not stop. By mid-June, German intelligence already warned Berlin that the American infantry was proving far more formidable than expected. Yet the full extent of this transformation would only be revealed in the coming weeks, as the hedgerow battles intensified and the Germans faced a relentless force that fought, in their words, like machines. To German officers watching from their observation post, the most unsettling discovery at Normandy wasn't American firepower, it was American behavior. They expected Allied troops to falter under pressure, hesitate after losses, or recoil when ambushed. But instead, they found infantry who operated with a chilling consistency. When American soldiers were pinned, they crawled forward. When they lost men, they reorganized instantly. When a squad leader fell, the next man stepped up without waiting for orders. This wasn't the product of blind obedience. It was the result of training built around initiative. Every U.S. infantryman was taught not just to follow orders, but to understand the mission, to know what the next step should be, and to continue it even when leadership was gone. Astor's German diaries mention scenes that seemed almost unnatural. Wounded Americans continuing to drag ammo belts forward, riflemen advancing under machine gun fire, with methodical spacing, squads maneuvering with precision. Even after taking casualties, some German lieutenant wrote, "They fight as if loss does not affect them. They go on as a machine continues when a cog breaks." American morale also stunned the German. Soldiers joked in foxholes, shared rations under fire, and maintained a sense of camaraderie that seemed to power them forward, long after exhaustion should have overtaken them. Asterisk against an army already straining from years of combat on multiple fronts. This combination of energy, teamwork, and resilience felt impossible. The Germans had prepared for a conventional infantry assault. What they faced was a human engine of endurance. The hedgerows of Normandy were intended to be Germany's secret weapon, a natural fortress stretching across the countryside. Each field was its own battlefield. Fortified walls of earth and roots, perfectly shaped kill zones for MG-42 machine gun teams. German doctrine predicted the Americans would be shredded, slowed, and stopped. They were not prepared for how quickly U.S. infantry adapted. American squads learned within days how to assault hedgerows using a combination of fire teams and engineers. A typical assault became a carefully choreographed movement. One team laid suppressive fire, another flanked the hedgerow. Engineers blew gaps with TNTBA or gunners hammered. German position tanks advanced straight through hedgerows using Rhino blades to the German. This was terrifying. They expected Americans to attack head-on and die in the gaps. Instead, they found themselves outmaneuvered from angles they believed inaccessible. Units like the 29th, 2nd, and 30th Infantry Divisions learned to use the bocage to their advantage, crawling along ditch lines, popping up on flanks, and coordinating closely with their artillery. German reports began using unusual language. The Americans have become very dangerous in the hedgerows. Their assaults are precise and repeatable. They fight with cold calculation. Nothing unnerved the Wehrmacht more than watching a tactic that worked one day fail the next. Because the Americans had already adjusted. In Normandy's hellish green maze, the U.S. infantry didn't just fight, they evolved. German riflemen entered Normandy carrying the reliable but slow Car-9 8K, a bolt-action rifle requiring a pull-andry load for every shot. Against Soviet troops, it had been adequate. Against lightly equipped early war Americans, it had worked. Against the M1 Garand It was outmatched the moment the first trigger was pulled. The semi-automatic Garand gave American infantry a rate of fire that stunned German squads. Soldiers could fire rapidly, reload quickly, and maintain a continuous stream of shots that overwhelmed German positions. Then came the BAR, a weapon German soldiers came to fear deeply. Its automatic burst, stable accuracy, and ability to lay suppressive fire at medium range gave U.S. squads something the Germans didn't expect: the ability to dominate small unit firefights. Add in the devastating fire support available at a moment's notice: mortars, artillery, naval guns, and air support, and the Americans seemed to possess endless firepower. One German machine gunner wrote, "Their rifles fire like submachine guns. Their artillery arrives as fast as thought. Their weapons do not stop." The combination of semi-automatic rifles, rapid radio coordination, and overwhelming support fire created infantry whose lethality felt superhuman to German troops. It appeared as if every American squad carried the firepower of an entire platoon. This technological edge didn't just win firefights, it eroded German confidence. Battle by battle, German commanders in previous campaigns had grown accustomed to seeing enemy units collapse when their officers were killed. In Normandy, they discovered an entirely different reality. American junior officers, lieutenants, and captains barely in their 20s fought with a mixture of aggression, improvisation, and cold adaptability that the Germans did not expect from a young army. When a platoon leader was shot, the sergeant immediately stepped in. If the sergeant fell, the corporal took command. If the corporal was gone, the next rifleman took responsibility. This decentralized command structure shocked the Wehrmacht. German doctrine emphasized leadership flowing from the top. American doctrine empowered leadership from the bottom up. Field reports from the 352nd Infantry Division recorded, "Their officers are interchangeable. If one falls, another appears." Another officer wrote after fighting the 2nd Infantry Division near Saint-Lô, "We cannot break their cohesion. Their command regenerates as fast as we destroy it." American officers also led from the front. Many were seen charging through hedgerows, coordinating armor, directing fire, and physically pulling men forward. This visible leadership was deeply morale-building for U.S. troops, and deeply unsettling for German observers. Combined with strong NCO corps, the U.S. Army became a battlefield organism that functioned even when torn apart to German officers. This wasn't merely bravery, it was systematic resilience, something much harder to defeat than courage alone. During the early phases of the war, German troops consistently encountered opponents who fell back under concentrated fire. Normandy broke that pattern. German soldiers fighting in the hedgerows expected American units to retreat when faced with MG to fire, but instead, they watched riflemen dive into ditches, crawl forward, and appear on their flanks minutes later. At Carentan, German Fallschirmjäger described the Americans as unbreakable. At Saint-Lô, Panzergrenadiers wrote that the Americans fought with a machine-like steadiness. At Hill 192, one German officer famously reported, "They came again and again. It was unnatural. The shock came from repetition." The Americans didn't just attack once, they attacked repeatedly, predictably, mechanically, each assault identical to the last. Each movement executed with the same disciplined precision. Astor's German officers compared them to Soviet infantry for mass and determination, but with an organizational discipline that made them even more dangerous. One diary entry from a German captain in the 3rd Parachute Division read, "The Americans approach, as if on rails. Their fire never ceases. Their men never hesitate." For the first time in the war, German infantry felt like they were being ground down. The initiative was slipping away. Every hour, every hedgerow gained by the Americans came at a heavy price, but they kept paying it without pause. The Germans had encountered determination before, but not like this. Not infantry who fought as if fatigue didn't exist and losses meant nothing. To them, it was as if the Americans were less like men and more like machines of war. Weapons can win battles, tactics can win engagements, but true morale wins campaigns. American infantry in Normandy carried a moral strength that surprised German troops who expected a soft, emotionally fragile army. Instead, they found soldiers fighting not for conquest, but for liberation, men who believed the war had purpose, and that stopping meant letting evil endure. This emotional foundation created a resilience that penetrated every engagement. German troops described moments that shook them psychologically. Asterisk Americans laughing in foxholes between artillery, barrage soldiers sharing cigarettes, during lulls in machine gun fire, infantry cheering when fresh units arrived, wounded men insisting on rejoining their platoons. This wasn't reckless enthusiasm, it was a belief that the war could and must be won. Germany, by contrast, fought under the weight of exhaustion, doubt, and the slow awareness that their homeland was crumbling. The Americans fought with the momentum of a rising power, a sense of inevitability that terrified many German observers. One captured German officer said during interrogation, "We feared the Russians. We respected the British. But the Americans, they overwhelmed us. They fought as if they could not lose." That mentality, unyielding, forward driving, Purpose-driven became a psychological weapon all its own. It wasn't just American firepower that broke the German lines. It was American morale, fused with discipline, acting like a motor that would not turn off. July 1944, the approaches to Saint-Lô. The air smelled of dust, cordite, and crushed leaves. For weeks, the fighting in Normandy had dragged through the hedgerows like a slow-motion nightmare. Every field was a fortress. Every farmyard was a kill zone. Every lane was a rifle barrel pointed at the next infantry company. But on the morning of July 11, something shifted. The American infantry was no longer merely pushing through the bocage. They were breaking it apart. German officers from the 3rd Fallschirmjäger Division watched from their observation post as the U.S. 29th and 35th Infantry Divisions made their next advance. The Germans had reinforced their machine gun nests, laid new mines, and zeroed in their mortars. They expected the familiar pattern: Americans approach, take casualties, fall back, reorganize, and try again. But this time, the Americans didn't fall back. A mortar barrage opened a path through the hedgerow wall. Smoke hung thick in the air. As German machine gunners prepared to fire on the choke point, they saw dark shapes moving fast through the haze. American infantry line after line of them stormed through the gap in a coordinated rush. Astor's German accounts described the moment with disbelief. They came forward under fire without hesitation. The Americans attacked in synchronized squads, each knowing exactly when to move. One fire team laid down suppressive rifle fire. Another sprinted to the next hedgerow. Engineers threw charges over the wall, while BAR gunners hammered the German positions. To the Germans, it felt like fighting a hydraulic press every time they stopped one push. Another immediately followed. At the village of Le Desert, the 35th Infantry Division fought through hedgerow after hedgerow with a rhythm that seemed almost mechanical. German observers noted that the Americans advanced in measured, tireless waves, each unit moving the moment another unit halted. Even when entire platoons were cut down, the attack didn't falter. Replacement squads slid into position as if guided by an unseen coordinator. It wasn't chaos. It wasn't desperation. It was structure and yielding structure. One German captain watching from a ruined barn wrote in his journal, "They fight without pause. They are relentless. It is like fighting an army that feels nothing." The turning point came outside the hamlet of Martinville Ridge. The 116th Infantry Regiment struck directly through 3 fortified hedgerows, each defended by MG-42 teams. German machine gunners fired until their barrels glowed red, expecting to see the American assault collapse. But the Americans kept coming. BAR teams crawled forward under fire, firing from their hips. Grenadiers tossed explosives over the hedgerow wall. Riflemen advanced in bounding rushes so consistent that one German officer said it was as if they had been drilled in this terrain for years. Within 30 minutes, all 3 German positions were overrun. The shock was immediate. German troops retreating towards Saint-Lô began reporting that American infantry were behaving like iron soldiers, advancing with what felt like mechanical determination. Their movements were too consistent, their fire too constant, their pressure too unbroken. On that day, for the first time, German command realized the truth. The Americans were no longer learning Normandy, they had mastered it, and once they mastered it, the German lines could no longer hold. July 25, 1944, Operation Cobra. The day that German officers finally understood what American relentlessness truly meant. The night before the assault, the sky over Normandy glowed with silent flashes of distant artillery. The countryside trembled as thousands of American guns, mortars, and aircraft prepared for the breakout. German troops in the defensive belt west of Saint-Lô braced themselves. They had held the hedgerows for nearly 2 months and believed they could continue resisting indefinitely. They had no idea what was coming. At 0900 hours, the world erupted. A carpet of American bombers, B-17s, B-24s, and medium attack aircraft unleashed an earthquake of explosions across the German lines. Entire fields rose, shattered, and collapsed. Defensive positions vanished in seconds. Communication wires were cut, trenches buried, and battalions ripped apart. But what came after the bombing shocked the Germans even more. As the dust settled and the ground still shook, American infantry began moving forward swiftly, confidently, without the hesitation the Germans expected after such a chaotic bombardment. Units from the 9th, 4th, and 30th Infantry Divisions surged ahead with an urgency that stunned observers. A German colonel near Hebekrevan shouted to his staff, "They are advancing through the smoke, through the craters." American infantry streamed past burning craters and shattered tree lines in synchronized movement. Platoons advanced with purpose. Fire teams sprinted from cover to cover. Engineers cleared mines and obstacles with ruthless precision. And following close behind, like the teeth of a giant machine, came the Sherman's Rhino tanks tearing through hedgerows that had once slowed the entire Allied advance. German defenders tried to regroup. Panzer Grenadiers scrambled to set up MG-42s. Fallschirmjäger units attempted counterattack, but the Americans were already too deep, too fast, too coordinated. It was here that German officers first used the phrase, "They fight like machines, always moving, always firing, never stopping, near La Chapelle-en-Juger. A German machine gun crew fired until their barrel overheated. They watched American riflemen dive into the dirt only to reappear seconds later on the flank, moving with impossible speed. The MG-42 team was overrun within minutes. Survivors later said they had never seen infantry adapt positions so quickly in the advancing wave. Leadership didn't falter. When lieutenants fell, sergeants took over. When sergeants went down, corporals stepped forward. The advance never paused, not for casualties, not for confusion, not for fear. By the afternoon, the German 2nd Panzer Division realized the line had broken. Not bent, broken. The American infantry didn't behave like the scattered, cautious force of 1942. They operated with an unstoppable rhythm. A Fallschirmjäger battalion commander reported, "They attack, we push them back, they attack again." Each assault identical to the last, as if commanded by a single mind. By July 27th, German units were in full retreat. Their fortified hedgerow positions, once thought impregnable, were collapsing under the steady, tireless pressure of American infantry. The U.S. Army had achieved what was considered impossible, a clean breakout from Normandy. After 2 months of grinding attrition. And for the German officers who survived those days, the explanation was simple and unsettling. Their infantry fought with the discipline of machines. Nothing we did stopped them. The breakout had begun. The German army was now running. When the German lines finally cracked during Operation Cobra, the consequences rippled far beyond the fields of Normandy. What began as a local breakthrough quickly evolved into a strategic collapse, one that German commanders could neither halt nor fully comprehend. The first signs appeared in the shattered remnants of Panzerlehr, once considered one of Germany's elite armored divisions. After weeks of brutal attrition in the hedgerows, the division emerged from Saint-Lô with only a fraction of its tanks, most of its battalion commanders killed or wounded, and its infantry companies reduced to shadows of their former strength. American infantry hadn't just defeated them, they had inundated them. Reports flowing into German headquarters painted a bleak picture. Machine gun nests destroyed one after another, mortar teams wiped out by relentless counter-fire, defensive lines collapsing faster than they could be rebuilt, command post overrun before new orders could be issued in previous battles. German units often regrouped effectively after a retreat. Normandy was different. Every field, every lane, every hedgerow was saturated with American infantry moving in synchronized formations. It wasn't merely pursuit, it was a suffocating pressure. German commanders began describing American infantry movements with the same word: tactlos, unaltering, tactically unyielding. For the first time since the early months of the Eastern Front, German units were experiencing something they had rarely felt: exhaustion from being constantly attacked, not once a day, but every hour. German battalion logs show grim notes: continuous American infantry pressure. Advances do not stop at night. Enemy coordination exact and tireless. The psychological effect was devastating. Soldiers who had survived years of combat from Poland to Russia found themselves unnerved not by American numbers, but by American persistence. A captured German sergeant from the 3rd Fallschirmjäger Division admitted during interrogation, "We fought the Russians for years, but they attacked in waves. The Americans, they attacked like gears turning. When one stopped, another started." This perception spread rapidly through German ranks. Officers no longer spoke of American weakness or inexperience. Instead, they feared their consistency. They called the U.S. infantry the army that does not tire, a phrase found in multiple POW interrogation transcripts. The consequences of Cobra were now unmistakable. Saint-Lô-Felcoutenses Felivranches was reached and seized German supply lines. Collapsed retreats turned into routes. American infantry wasn't simply advancing, it was ripping open the front faster than German command could react. The Wehrmacht no longer had the reserves, the fuel, or the intact units needed to stabilize the situation. By early August, German commanders faced a crisis they were unwilling to admit publicly. The U.S. infantry had become the backbone of an unstoppable advance. Their steady, machine-like rhythm had broken the myth of German invincibility in the West. The Americans were no longer the newcomers of 1942. They were a seasoned, deadly force driving straight for the heart of the German defense. And the German high command, watching their maps darken with American gains, realized the truth. Normandy had produced a new kind of infantryman, one capable of dismantling an entire army. The collapse triggered by Operation Cobra didn't stop at tactical defeat. It reshaped the entire Western Front and forced German command to confront a reality they had long denied. The American infantry was no longer an auxiliary force carried by tanks and aircraft, it was the decisive weapon of allied power. As the breakout widened, the retreating German columns attempted to regroup around Morton, hoping to counterattack and cut off the advancing American. But when the Germans launched Operation Luttich on August 7th, they immediately ran into the same force that had shattered them in the hedgerows. Relentless U.S. infantry supported by coordinated artillery and efficient command structures. The German attack stalled almost as soon as it began. Asterisk American infantry from the 30th Infantry Division, spread across defensive positions, absorbed the shock of panzer assaults that would have broken less organized forces. Even when Tiger tanks rolled through the early mist, the Americans didn't panic. They dug in, held their ground, and called in accurate artillery strikes with the precision of a well-oiled machine. German commanders were stunned. They had expected chaos yet found order. They had expected retreat yet found defiance. Within 48 hours, the counterattack collapsed. Within a week, the German forces were in full retreat again. Asterisk this retreat turned catastrophic in the Falaise pocket, where American, British, and Canadian forces encircled tens of thousands of German troops. U.S. infantry played a critical role in tightening the encirclement, capturing ground with a pace and steadiness the Germans couldn't match. Prisoners taken during this phase expressed disbelief at what they had witnessed. "Your infantry is everywhere. They attack from all sides. We could not reorganize. They gave us no time." Asterisk the machine-like impression persisted. German officers consistently described American infantry movements as methodical, tireless, and always coordinated, even when units took casualties or operated in broken terrain. One German major told Allied interrogators after the Falaise collapse, "Your soldiers, they do not fight like amateurs anymore. They fight like a disciplined engine, every part working even when damaged." By September 1944, the consequences of American relentlessness were deeply felt. German divisions disintegrated faster than they could be reformed. Armored reserves were decimated. Supply depots were los morali. Plummeted. Defensive lines collapsed before they could be completed. German high command privately acknowledged what their frontline troops had learned the hard way. American infantry had become one of the most effective fighting forces on the Western Front. It wasn't just the firepower. It wasn't just the tactics. It wasn't just the leadership. It was the rhythm, the unbroken, unyielding rhythm of an army that attacked, regrouped, and attacked again with mechanical precision. This momentum pushed the Allies across France, liberated Paris, and carried them toward the borders of Germany itself. For the Germans who survived Normandy, the memory remained vivid and haunting. They had fought determined foes before, but Normandy introduced them to something new: an American infantryman who did not stop, did not hesitate, and did not break. A soldier who fought, in their words, like a machine built for war. When the guns fell silent in Normandy, and the smoke drifted away over the shattered fields, a quiet truth hung over the battlefield, one understood not only by the victors, but by the defeated. Behind every American advance, behind every breakthrough, behind every hedgerow taken at terrible cost, there walked a new kind of soldier. Not invincible, not fearless, but unwavering. German officers, hardened by years of war across Europe, had underestimated the American. They expected a force that cracked under pressure. Instead, they met infantry who absorbed fire, reorganized instantly, and attacked again with the same disciplined rhythm as before. The Germans compared them to machines because they had rarely seen an enemy who fought with such consistency day after day, field after field, without the collapse that German doctrine assumed would eventually occur. Yet what those officers witnessed was not mechanical coldness. It was human determination shaped by training, leadership, and belief. The American infantryman was not driven by a single ideology, but by a combination of personal courage, trust in his comrades, confidence in his equipment, and a profound sense of purpose. The mission mattered, liberation mattered, each other mattered. The machine-like quality came from something deeply human: discipline under chaos, the ability to adapt, the refusal to surrender, momentum even under fire. Normandy exposed this truth in the rawest way possible. In its sunken roads and shadowed hedgerows, American infantry grew into a force capable of breaking one of the most formidable armies in the world. They did it not through overwhelming numbers alone, nor through technology alone, but through a relentless unity of effort, a shared will that turned squads into engines of movement. The Germans left Normandy with their assumptions shattered. The Americans left with a legacy forged in grit and sacrifice, and history would remember that in the fields of France. Ordinary men, farmers, factory workers, students, clerks rose to meet an extraordinary challenge, and fought with a resolve so steady that even their enemies could describe it only one way. They fought like machines.